This is Life in the 1900s newspapers, and we're going to read a vintage newspaper together. In today's video, we're going to find out what happened in a day in the Roaring '20s. In the '20s, people were out and about, just enjoying life and all it had to offer. When they wanted to know what was in the news, often they listened to their radio. But the most popular form of information was, of course, the newspaper, which came out more than once a day. Today, we will be reading the State newspaper from Columbia, South Carolina, dated Tuesday morning, March 6, 1928. I like to find the more unusual articles from my newspapers, like this one. Tom Sawyer dead, Spokane, Washington, March 5th. Tom Sawyer, whose pranks depicted by Samuel L. Clemens, Mark Twain, have caused millions to laugh and weep, is dead. Mrs. Flavilla Pinio of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, revealed here today that her brother, Thomas Sawyer, who died February 7th at Tucson, Arizona, and was buried in Bellevue Cemetery, Ontario, was the original of the famous writer's story. Clemens, she said, first saw Tom Sawyer on a riverboat on the Mississippi. Kitty McKay. The girlfriend says when her coal gives out, she just puts a few murder trials and divorce case scandals in the furnace and doesn't even have to light them. Did you know that one way to identify a flapper is by her bobbed hair?
Step up a little closer, friends, and feast your eyes on the largest human being that ever lived on this terrestrial globe. 736 pounds of healthy, happy manhood. And remember, Big Bob is only one of the 80 freaks, monstrosities, and curiosities we have gathered from the far corners of the earth. What a cinch those freaks have! All that fat guy had to do was to be born, and a good job was waiting for him. Every time he sits down to a meal, he raises his salary. Nothing to do all day but sit around and watch himself get heavy. And if that bearded lady don't bob her whiskers, she has a job for life. And that glass eater don't have to worry about where his next meal is coming from. Gosh, if only I had the good luck to be born a freak, I could be eating off gold dishes and sleeping on a mattress stuffed with Liberty Bonds.
Fred Spencer Jr., champion 6-day bicycle rider, smokes Lucky Strikes. During my rest periods of the 6-day bicycle races, nothing is so soothing to my nerves as a Lucky Strike cigarette because they are cool and never irritate my throat. Lucky Strike cigarettes. Free for all in summer church, Sumter, March 5th. A quarrel that started in a Negro church here during an entertainment ended on the street outside in a free-for-all fight in which knives were used freely. One woman was severely cut on the head and the face. Hattie Ingrari and Mary Harvin seemed to be the principals in the affair, and Hattie came off second best. Mary's only injury was to her overcoat, which was slashed in several places. The argument started in the church, it was said, over a piece of sheet music, and was continued later on with the passing of insulting remarks and the use of pocket knives. Chief Marsh and his new car. Fire Chief A. McMarsh standing beside his new official machine, the Rio Flying Cloud, after it had been painted with the colors of the department in the paint shop at the Central Station on Sumter Street. The driver inside the car is M.S. Moore. The machine is black on the upper section with the body fire department red striped with gold. The machine was purchased by the city from the Carolina Rio Motor Company at about 5:30 yesterday afternoon and was pressed into service for the first time on the call from the 600 block of Taylor Street. Paint a baboon blue. In a recent report of the governor of the British Crown Colony of Kenya is included a report by the game warden telling how the settlers of the colony have been annoyed by elephants, hippopotami, bush pigs, and baboons. He describes a process which has been very effective in dealing with baboons. A baboon is caught in a cage trap or gin with muffled jaws being used, and a thick sack or rug is thrown over its head. Several persons then hold the animal, which is shaved as far as possibly all over. This operation being completed, the baboon is painted a thick coat of Cambridge blue and liberated. No member of his troop will again have anything to do with him. The whirl of fashion, the spirit of 2 seasons. A picture hat may be wreathed with flowers. Prints find their way into the millinery mode. what's playing at the movies. At the Imperial Theater, Monday and Tuesday, Feel My Pulse, starring B.B. Daniels. Oh, doctor, my heart is running wild. Yes, doctor, I was fine till he looked into my eyes and whispered those things. Since then, I can't make my heart behave. She is an athletic invalid, this healthy little sick girl, who seeks rest in the sanitarium, which bootleggers make their hangout. When the hijackers arrive, the fun becomes hilarious. Pink pills, pistols, and pale whiskey make the heart palpitate. At the Ideal Theater, Carl Dane and George K. Arthur in Baby Mine. They shook the country with long, loud laughs in Rookies. They'll raise a real mirthquake now with this comedy riot. Two college boys, but what they know about babies was nobody's business. It's a howl. Just take a moment to look at this 1920s footage of some flapper ladies with style. Did you know one of the fashionable fad for flappers was painting your legs? Surprising results of the painted knees fad. At the Convention of Beauty Specialists held recently in Chicago, it was decreed that the very latest and smartest thing for the well-dressed young woman to do was to paint dainty little pictures on her knees. Knees, it was pointed out, have now come into their own as one of women's natural charms. Because of rolled stockings and short skirts, they, like their fair owners, are emancipated. Their possibilities should not be neglected. The new fad seems harmless enough as such things go nowadays, but already it has had some surprising and quite embarrassing results. Arthur X. Wilson, for instance, didn't even know there was such a fad. Mr. Wilson owns a prosperous coal mine near Carlisle in Pennsylvania, and it keeps him pretty busy. He never has quite been able to keep up with the latest wrinkles in the smart world of fashion. But there was no reason why he should try to. His attractive young wife, Clarice, promptly and faithfully went in for every one of them as fast as they came along. Young Mr. Wilson is a bit old-fashioned, but he is not narrow-minded. When his wife announced several years ago that she was going to bob her hair, he was depressed. But after she finally did it, he made the best of it, as so many other husbands have done. When she took to smoking cigarettes, he raised his voice in protest, but eventually he resigned himself to that. And when Mr. Wilson came home a few months later, he found his wife had two small, very ugly dogs. Mr. Wilson put his foot down and said he didn't like dogs, especially small ones. Mrs. Wilson told him that she was going to keep the dogs no matter what he said, because it was the very latest fashion to have 2 small dogs. He comforted himself with a thought that since his wife had gone in for every fool fad there was, at least there was nothing new left for her to take up. He was wrong. A few weeks ago, he came home and found her sitting on the davenport reading a novel. "Hello, dear," she called out cheerily. Mr. Wilson stared. He closed his eyes tight and looked again. Mrs. Wilson had one pretty knee thrown carelessly over the other one. Her stockings were, as usual, rolled, and on the knee was painted a living, speaking likeness of one of the dogs Mr. Wilson so hated. In a daze, still scarcely believing his eyes, Wilson silently hung his hat in the closet. When he came back and looked again, Mrs. Wilson was still reading. She had uncrossed her legs and crossed them again the other way, and on the other knee, which was now visible, Mr. Wilson was stupefied to see glaring at him a picture of the other dog. Wilson took a deep breath. This was the end. He strode to the table and raised his clenched fist, but he caught himself and stopped. Still staring at those knees, he got out his pipe and filled it. He was thinking quickly. "How are you, darling?" he asked pleasantly. Then, in the best good humor, he sat down and began to tell her what had happened during the day at the office. Not a single reference did he make to those decorated knees. Mrs. Wilson was puzzled. As he talked on, she furtively pulled up her skirts another inch or so to be sure that the cute little pictures were visible. The next day, Mrs. Wilson went to the clubhouse, and all of her friends were raving about her beautiful knees. But just as the enthusiasm was at its height, a hush suddenly fell. Someone gave a gasp and pointed to a man who had just come out of the clubhouse and sat down at a table. Mrs. Wilson gave a squeak of dismay. It was her husband. Without glancing at the horrified crowd of ladies who stared at him, he picked up a magazine and started to read. In horror, Mrs. Wilson looked at his knees. His knickerbockers were rolled up and his stockings were rolled down. Painted on the bony and powerful, but not very pretty knees that were thus exposed were the startling likeness of 2 of the popular young women of the town. By nightfall, Mr. Wilson's courageous act was the talk of the town. The other husbands hailed him as a deliverer, and they let it be known that if their wives left those crazy pictures on their knees, they would do what Mr. Wilson did. So, in the town of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, painted knees are not the fad. Here's one famous flapper that didn't need to paint her knees to get attention. Muriel Finlay.